this point, this is considered a mass suicide.
Welcome back to Marvelous Videos. Today we're looking into the 12 most sinister cults to ever exist. Perhaps it's the promise of purpose and salvation, or perhaps it's the sense of belonging. Whatever the reason, cults have drawn thousands of people into their deviant high-control groups, often held together by a charismatic leader. But shared delusions, murderous leaders, and followers without freedom is never a successful combination. Without much further ado, let's start looking into the most sinister and dangerous cults to ever exist. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
I'd take this book and beat you to death with it, and I wouldn't feel a thing. It'd be just like...
1. The Manson Family. 1960s America was paving the way to a new counterculture, the hippie movement, which advocated a spiritual way of life and denouncement from materialism. Many middle-class young women who were searching for meaning in their lives were attracted to this movement, and some of them found it under the leadership of Charles Manson. Charles Manson was a habitual criminal, incarcerated and institutionalized multiple times since childhood, after which he moved to San Francisco to become a musician. There, he established himself as a messiah, preaching to his mostly female following who believed him to be a reincarnation of Jesus Christ. Manson administered LSD to his followers and lectured them for hours, demanding blind loyalty and obedience from them. He used his female followers to lure more men into his family. Still interested in establishing a musical career, Manson gained access to Dennis Wilson, a singer in the Beach Boys, when Wilson offered a ride to two of his followers. Impressed by Manson's charm and following, Wilson allowed them to move into his mansion and introduced him to Greg Jacobson, the songwriter, Terry Melcher, the record producer, and Rudy Altobelli, a talent manager. But the latter men did not think Manson had much musical caliber, and once Wilson moved out of his mansion, the family was evicted by the landlord. With his musical dreams still intact, Manson began to concentrate on a vision he called Helter Skelter. He convinced the family that there would be a race war soon, which would destroy most of civilization, during which they would seek shelter in underground caves. As chosen ones, they would later emerge to rule what was left of civilization. He used the White Album by the Beatles as evidence to his prophecy and relocated his family to Spahn Ranch. This apocalyptic race war was to be triggered by an album that they recorded. They hoped in vain for Terry Melcher's visit to record said album, but Melcher had severed all contacts with the Manson family. Manson's first victim was a drug dealer named Bernard Crow that one of his followers tried to rob. In the same month, his followers held Gary Hinman, a music teacher, hostage as they believed him to be wealthy. They tried to convince him to join the family and turn over his assets to Manson, but when he denied being rich, he was brutally murdered. One of the followers, Bobby Beausoleil, was arrested, and this triggered their murder spree, as they thought that if similar murders were discovered, Bobby would be considered innocent, with the real murderers still at large. Their most notorious act was the murders they committed on the night of August 8, 1969. Manson commanded some of his family members to kill everyone at Melcher's former house, which was now rented by Roman Polanski and his wife Sharon Tate. The family found 5 members in the house: Sharon Tate, the actress who was pregnant at the time, Jay Sebrig, a hairstylist, Abigail Folger, heiress to Folger's Coffee, Wojtek Frykowski, an actor, and Stephen Parent, who was visiting the caretaker of the house. The next night, Manson directed his followers to a random house in an upscale LA neighborhood where they raided and murdered the couple inside, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. The murders were soon linked through the bloody writings on the wall that the family had left behind, and Charles Manson and his followers were arrested. Some of the followers who were not directly involved in the murders were provided immunity and testified against Manson, who was sentenced to life imprisonment. While in prison, Manson still had control over his followers, one of whom tried to assassinate Gerald Ford, the then president of the United States. With that, the Manson family came to an abrupt end, casting a long, devious shadow over the carefree, free love policy of the hippie culture.
Jones ordered a mass suicide. 914 people were murdered.
2. Jonestown, the People's Temple. If you ever used the term drinking Kool-Aid, you owe an apology to the People's Temple in Jonestown, USA. Founded in the 1950s, Jim Jones established the People's Temple after he was kicked out of the Peace Mission by Mother Divine for trying to convince the followers of the mission that he was the reincarnation of Father Divine, the founder of the movement. The People's Temple initially emphasized racial equality and communal living, which was revolutionary during that time when segregation laws were still in place. But eventually, Jones' hunger for power and control grew, and he isolated his followers from the mainland by establishing a commune in Guyana. Jones demanded complete faith and obedience from his followers, even testing their loyalty by asking them to drink fake poison sometimes. Temple members worked 12 hours a day with just 1 hour of break in between for 6 days a week, after which they attended classes on socialism and communism. Jones subjected the members of the temple to mind control and behavior modification techniques inspired from Mao Zedong and Kim Il-sung. He exercised immense control over them by prohibiting any communication with the outside world and controlling the media they were allowed to see. People who tried to escape were imprisoned in extensive care units and administered drugs. Children were separated from their parents in a communal care facility and were only allowed to see their biological parents for a few hours at night. They were expected to call Jim Jones dad or father. When California Congressman Leo Ryan visited the settlement with journalists, many people in Jonestown told him that they wanted to go back to the USA, which Jones considered betrayal. Before Leo Ryan, his team, and the defectors could board the plane, Jones ordered to open fire on all of them. Jim Jones felt his power dwindling after people began escaping the settlement. Among them were Tim and Grace, whose son John was held hostage by Jones, claiming that he was his son. After U.S. courts demanded he return John to the Stone couple, Jones became paranoid over a raid on his settlements and began ordering drills in the middle of the night. One of these drills, famously called the 6-Day Siege, lasted for 6 days. As a final test of loyalty, Jones demanded his followers drink cyanide mixed with a beverage, which resulted in the deaths of 918 people in the settlement. Although many newspapers claimed the drink was Kool-Aid, it was actually an off-brand called Flavor Aid. Thus ended the terrible regime of Jim Jones.
But at this point, this is considered a mass suicide.
3. Heaven's Gate. A weird combination of science and spirituality, the founders of Heaven's Gate, Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, believed that the apocalypse was going to be brought about by aliens. A UFO would descend during the last days and save the true believers of Heaven's Gate. Initially, Applewhite and Nettles wrote pamphlets claiming that they were the two witnesses mentioned in the Book of Revelations and called themselves the UFO 2. They held meetings of like-minded people who believed in the extraterrestrials and convinced people that they could teach them how to reach higher evolutionary levels than humans. Their target audience was people who intended to seek a spiritual identity, or truth seekers and hippies. People followed them, saying goodbye to their friends and family and selling their material possessions. They renamed themselves Doe and T and preached to their followers that their earthly vehicles or bodies were inhabited by alien souls. In 1976, Doe and T banned sexual activity and drug use in their small community and set stricter guidelines. In 1996, they, along with their 39 followers, rented a mansion, which they called the Monastery. They believed that the unidentified flying object that trailed the Hale-Bopp comet was the sign they were looking for, and to ascend physically and spiritually, they all needed to commit mass suicide. On March 22, 1997, all the followers dressed in black shirts, sweatpants, and new Nike shoes. They wore an armband that said Heaven's Gate Away Team and had $5.75 in their pockets. Some former members believe they had $5 to protect them against vagrancy laws and the quarters to call back home from payphones, while others believe that was the cost of riding the comet's tail. The members were arranged in 3 groups. One group would consume phenobarbital mixed with applesauce or pudding and put a plastic bag over themselves. After they asphyxiated, the alive group would lay them on their beds and cover them with a purple blanket. Followers, before consuming the poison, recorded farewell messages, which they then sent to associations that Heaven's Gate was previously affiliated with, including the BBC reporter to whom they had once declined an interview request. The eeriest part of this cult is that their website is still active and is believed to be maintained by believers and former members.
You will overcome through my power.
4. The Branchvidians. The Branchvidians began after Victor Houtef, a Seventh-day Adventist Sabbath school teacher, wrote a book titled Shepherd's Rod, the 144, a call for reformation, where he wrote about new views for the church. But church leaders rejected it, following which Houtef left with his followers, establishing a headquarters in Waco, Texas, and naming themselves the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. This headquarters was named Mount Carmel after the biblical mountain. After his death, his wife Florence was convinced of an apocalypse in 1959. When that didn't happen, one of the followers, Benjamin Roden, created a group called the Branchvidians and took control of Mount Carmel. After the death of Benjamin Roden, Vernon Howell rose to power and courted Roden's wife, Lois Roden. He was convinced that their child would be the chosen one. A power struggle arose between him and Roden's son, George Roden, which resulted in Howell and his followers being kicked out. But Howell soon raided Mount Carmel with his followers to regain power and was successful. He named himself David Koresh after biblical figures and was obsessed with the idea of creating a new generation of world leaders. He also believed that only he was capable of fathering new spiritual leaders and took on multiple wives, some as young as 12. He convinced his followers he was prophetic and claimed an imminent apocalypse. To prepare for the apocalypse, he began stockpiling weapons, which caught the attention of the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. After allegations of child abuse added to the illegal stockpiling of weapons in 1993, a 51-day standoff between the Branchvidians and federal agents began at their compound in Waco, Texas. The standoff reached its explosive end with gunfire and a fire that killed Koresh and 76 others. Later investigations revealed that the Davidians themselves started the fire. The Branchvidians still exist, as many people who did not accept the leadership of David Koresh left and avoided a brutal and gruesome end. 5. Aum Shinrikyo. Aum Shinrikyo, which means the religion of the Aum Supreme Truth, began as a yoga and meditation center in Tokyo in 1987. The founder, Shoko Asahara, was a charismatic and gifted speaker who mixed Eastern spirituality with biblical beliefs. He promised a healthy and smart life to his followers through yoga and positive thinking, and followed the Pali Sutras. Like most of the cults in our lists, Aum Shinrikyo had a humble and peaceful beginning with a genuine message. But that soon changed with Asahara's obsession with the biblical apocalypse. In the name of yoga, his disciples were administered LSD, hung upside down, and sometimes given shock therapy. He convinced his followers that through rigorous discipline, they could live through World War III, which was soon approaching. Till the 1980s, the controversial Aum Shinrikyo gained a large following, but trouble was soon to follow. In 1989, rumors began to circulate of the members being held against their will and forced to donate money. In October 1989, an anti-cult lawyer, Tsutsumi Sakamoto, threatened a lawsuit against them, soon after which his wife and child went missing. In 1993, they began wiretapping Japanese communication networks and tried to create an anthrax epidemic by spraying large amounts of liquid containing Bacillus anthracis spores from their headquarters, but failed as it only caused a bad smell and nothing more. They began manufacturing sarin, a nerve agent, and VX, a toxic chemical. They had an assassination list of people who spoke against the group and intended to assassinate all of them. They initially tested it out on sheep, and after 29 sheep died, they released clouds of sarin over judges who were overseeing a case against Aum Shinrikyo. This incident killed 8 people and harmed over 500. Even this horrible incident did not stop the group, as they remained undiscovered and continued terrorizing their adversaries. They administered VX and sarin to the followers they suspected were spies and people who helped previous followers escape. Police began joining the dots and planned a raid on their headquarters, but this raid would come too late, as Aum Shinrikyo released a coordinated chemical attack on 5 trains, killing 13 people, injuring 54 people, and harming over 980 commuters. Asahara believed that this would distract the cops, but this plan backfired as multiple Aum Shinrikyo centers were raided and followers were caught red-handed with manufacturing devices, drugs, nerve gases, and toxins. Their active branch in Russia planned bombings to rescue Asahara, but failed. With their leader and most of the members being arrested and kept on death row, Aum Shinrikyo was forced to go underground and later split into 2 factions. Aleph, which still followed ideals put forward by Asahara, and Hikari Nowa, also called Circle of Light, which was led by former Aum spokesperson Fumihiro Joyu. Aum Shinrikyo's regime led to a lot of new laws being established in Japan, which limited cult activity. 6. The Order of the Solar Temple. Like many cults, the one we're going to talk about now had its beginnings in an established religion. The Order of the Solar Temple initially began in the Golden Way Foundation founded by Joseph di Mambro, a French jeweler and a serial fraudster, which discussed issues of environmental pollution and aimed to develop knowledge about living healthy with organic farming and incorporating alternative healthcare techniques. This foundation gained a lot of followers quickly. Di Mambro, with Michael Tabachnik, a member of the Golden Way, decided to set aside a room for spiritualism and esotericism. They used the room to meditate and preach, and the members of the foundation began seeing Di Mambro as a medium. Soon, Luc Jouret joined the foundation and rose among the ranks. Di Mambro began taking his role as a medium quite seriously, as he predicted the birth of a cosmic child from his mistress, Dominique Belleton. He claimed her pregnancy was immaculate and was possible through his divine brain. The child, named Emmanuel, was declared by Di Mambro to be an avatar, a male soul trapped in a female body. Luc Jouret and Di Mambro split from Golden Way to form the Solar Temple in 1984. The Order of the Solar Temple followed lots of tenets from the New Age. For instance, Sirius, the blue star, is a focal point in the cult. They believed that the star was home to the Great White Brotherhood, souls that could manifest physically. The child Emmanuel was also worshipped in the cult as a cosmic child. Members of the Solar Temple also believed that special magical powers were given to them when certain sexual activities were conducted. Joseph di Mambro also separated couples whom he believed to be cosmically incompatible and forced them with other members of the temple. The members also believed that he was doing all this under the will of the Masters, or the Great White Brotherhood. He was commanded by them to create 7 or 9 cosmic children, who would be the new consciousness of the world. Members were also sometimes shown the manifestations of the Great Brotherhood, which were actually projected holograms. People began to doubt Di Mambro once they realized that the apparitions were merely holograms and were fake. The 1980s anti-cult movement also began to gain traction by the 1990s. The Messiah, Emmanuel, who had turned 12, began rebelling and rejecting the position of the Messiah. The members of the Solar Temple also had gained illegal weapons, leading to further pressure from the police. With the dwindling faith in the Solar Temple, Di Mambro declared an ascension to Sirius. Di Mambro wanted the traitors killed before they reached Sirius. Families that had deserted the Solar Temple were brutally murdered, while members of the temple set themselves on fire. The scary tale of the Solar Temple thus ended with many casualties. 7. The Children of God. The Family International. The Manson family wasn't the only cult to have emerged in the 1960s hippie movement. The Children of God, which was initially called Teens for Christ, was founded in 1968 by David Berg. David Berg incorporated the free love policy of the hippie movement with the ways of Jesus Christ. A former pastor, his policies began concentrating heavily on sexual freedom between adults and children. Berg supported free sexual relations, even among adults and children, and promoted among his followers a practice called flirty fishing. It included women flirting or sometimes offering sexual favors for men in order for them to join the cult. His open views on sex were apparent through his letters, called Mo letters, one of which was called Devil Hates Sex, but God Loves It. The members, who amounted to around 15,000 at its peak, were mainly teenagers who had run away from their homes. He preached that sex was a form of worship and a gift from God. As Berg's manipulation of children and teenagers became apparent, families started to leave the cult and began voicing out the abuse they faced in Children of God, with some members claiming that Berg forced them to sexually abuse other members. After Berg's death, Children of God rebranded to Family International, claiming that their main focus is on protecting the innocence of children.
Enlightenment simply means I know myself.
8. The Rajnish Movement. If you're a Netflix junkie, there's a high chance you've seen or heard about Wild Wild Country, a documentary about the Osho Rajnish movement. Indian guru Bhagwan Sri Rajnish, also known as Rajnish or Osho, gained many international followers who came to seek the peace and happy spiritual life he promised. The Rajnish movement was established in a controversial ranch, Rajnishpuram, in Oregon in the 1980s. Although Bhagwan Sri Rajnish preached a simple life of hard work and communal living, he himself was a man of immense power who sought control over all his followers and collected materialistic luxuries like diamond-studded watches and expensive cars. His followers, who were young men and women who sought meaning in their lives, left behind their brilliant futures to serve him and his motives. Rajnish wasn't welcomed by the locals in Oregon when he established the vibrant Rajnishpuram, and local authorities too were not happy by this community. Rajnish answered by spraying salmonella in a salad bar and inducing a mass food poisoning. His personal secretary, Ma Sheila, took the fall for this act of bioterrorism, but Rajnish too was deported back to India, where he continued to run his ashram in Pune. Some of his loyal followers actually followed him back to India.
Keith was the founder.
9. NXIVM. NXIVM was founded in late 1998 by Keith Raniere and Nancy Saltzman as a personal development company, initially marketed as a self-help organization that provided executive success programs, or ESP. His teachings attracted people who wanted to reach their higher selves. The anti-cult organization soon began to look at NXIVM with a suspicious lens, as Raniere claimed his techniques were trade secrets and demanded non-disclosure agreements be signed by his clients. Saltzman showed special attention to recruiting celebrities and influential people, among whom was Smallville actress Allison Mack. Women were lured in through the promise of female empowerment, but were later controlled both physically and financially by Raniere. In 2015, Raniere started a secret society of women called DOS, or Dominus Obsequious Sororium. Female members of NXIVM were branded with the initials of Raniere and called slaves. They were administered corporal punishments and were forced to provide nude pictures and damaging information about themselves as collateral. NXIVM members were also allegedly forced to recruit more members. Whistleblowers soon began to emerge, with some ex-members of NXIVM speaking to media outlets about their mistreatment and forced sexual slavery by Raniere. Raniere was soon arrested and sentenced to 120 years in prison. So next time you think a self-help group is like a cult, it just might be. 10. The Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God. Originating in Uganda in the 1980s and founded by Credonia Imwerende and Joseph Kibwetere, the Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God believed that impending doom could only be prevented by strict adherence to the Ten Commandments of God. The founders convinced their followers that they were receiving messages from the Virgin Mary and their followers would be the chosen ones to survive the apocalypse. Credonia Imwerende was believed to be the reincarnation of the Virgin Mary. Each group member was expected to read their gospel, a timely message from heaven, the end of the present time. The group also believed that the world would end on January 1st, 2000. When that day passed without any apocalypse, the next date was said to be March 17th, 2000. But followers had begun to doubt the prophetic visions of the founders, and when their followers reached the church on March 17th, the founders, Imwerende and Kibwetere, nailed the church shut, poured gasoline on the church, and set it on fire. The final death toll was 924. Although initially the police believed that Mwerinde and Kibweture also burnt to death in the church, they suspect that they escaped. 11. The Order, Silent Brotherhood. The white supremacist cult that we're going to talk about now is known by many names, including Brüder Schweigen, German for Brothers Keep Silent or Brothers Silence, and Silent Brotherhood. It was founded by Robert J. Matthews in 1983, who gained inspiration from William Luther Pierce's novel The Turner Diaries, a dystopian novel that promoted racial segregation. Matthews believed that the American government was controlled by a Jewish cabal, which they referred to as Zog, or Zionist-occupied government, and through the order wanted to establish an all-white nation where Jews were banned. They decided to raise money through robbery after a day's work of lumberjacking proved too hard and the pay was meager. They robbed porn stores, banks, and cars. Their motto was, "Thou art my battle axe and weapons of war. For with thee will I break in pieces the nations, and with thee will I destroy kingdoms." A biblical verse, half of which was displayed on their emblem in a banner above a shield with the blood cross and an axe. The Silent Brotherhood trained in the yard of Robert J. Matthews and drew up a hit list with names of people who they believed were against their ideology. One of the prominent members on their list was Alan Berg, a Jewish radio host who was murdered in front of his home by one of the members. The FBI soon infiltrated their group, with many members of the order volunteering to be spies. By the mid-1980s, all of the members were arrested, and the FBI surrounded Robert J. Matthews in his house. A shootout began, ending with Matthews' house engulfed in flames, which later exploded. Previous members of the Aryan Brotherhood tried to restart the order as the Order 2 in Idaho. They sent bombs to local Jewish men, which thankfully resulted in no deaths and the eventual arrest of the members of Order 2. 12. The Church of the Lamb of God. You previously heard about Charles Manson. Now let's look into a man named the Mormon Manson, Orville LeBaron. Orville LeBaron began the Church of the Lamb of God in the early 1970s after disagreements with the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times, a church founded by his brother Joel. Orville preached against his brother and actively propagated the principle of blood atonement, a practice that demanded that blood be shed by a sinner for him to be able to reach heaven, and the death penalty for serious crimes and sins. Orville preached to his followers that his brother was a sinner, and for him to reach heaven, his blood must be shed. Some of his followers carried out his orders and murdered Joel. His followers then appointed Verlon, Orville's other brother, as their leader. But Orville, who still expected to rule over his brother's church, was not pleased with this decision and decided to assassinate Verlon as well. Orville's followers raided the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times, killing 2 and injuring 13 people, but couldn't find Verlon. Orville escaped prison, as there wasn't enough proof against him. Orville relocated his reign of terror to California, where he threatened polygamist leaders if they didn't pledge their allegiance to the church. Anyone who threatened to go to the police or tried to leave the church was killed by the members. Amidst all this, Orville still hadn't given up the desire to murder his brother Verlon. But Orville's crimes soon caught up with him, and he was imprisoned. Even from prison, Orville exercised a lot of power over his followers and published a testament titled Book of New Covenants, in which he listed the names of 50 people who should undergo blood atonement. After he died in prison in 1980, his son Arturo took over the church and embraced the criminal enterprises of the church. When his wife tried to leave the church, he commanded his son to kill her. But Arturo's followers began rebelling and murdered him. After him, his brother Heber took over the church. The cult began targeting the list of names provided by Orville, but the law finally caught up to the LeBaron family. All the LeBaron brothers were arrested for various crimes, and the children were separated into different foster homes in hopes of showing them a normal childhood and hopefully ending the cycle of violence. Conclusion. And there you have it. The most sinister cults of all time boil down to power-hungry men who lust after control with charismatic smiles and unbelievable oratory skills. So the next time somebody tries to tell you that doomsday is coming and they know how to escape it, don't just walk away from them, run. Which cult scared you the most? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to Marvelous Videos for more interesting videos.